We're waiting for our time equities guys. They don't look like they're on yet. So
okay.
So there'll be 2 or 3 folks. So we'll have Ami Ziff, who I think maybe some of you have met. He's definitely interacted with the city over the years. Richard Reckney, who runs asset management there, and an analyst, Grant Scott. So Grant Scott's the one that's in question. So yeah, they're joining. I can perhaps in the interest of time get started, but I'm hoping that they have the correct.
We can wait a minute or 2.
Okay, thank you.
I just realized I never stopped my stopwatch Tuesday, so it's at hour 46 right now. We're just going the whole time in the background.
So you look familiar. What's your name? Oh yeah, hey, how's it going? Yeah, that's why.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're a consultant for Troutdale? Wow. Yeah.
Oh, here he is. Ami's in there. Great.
Right.
I saw Ami, and then I saw another gentleman.
It's getting closer.
There's so many people looking right now. I can't see who it is.
Yeah.
You and me both.
It's gonna happen.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about it this morning. I think 2007, 6, somewhere around there. Yeah. Yep. Little history.
Looks like Ami and Grant.
Great. Okay, that's. I think that's good. If Ami's there, that's the most important voice from time equities. So
Great.
So if you all are ready, we can get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having us.
Hold on, time out. Quick time out. I'm gonna hand it off to Marley.
Sure. No, you're fine. Thanks for being here. All of our thank yous go around. I was just going to introduce our side of the table really quick and then turn it over to you guys so you can do your presentation and introductions and everything. Oh, there's another person. I'm going to admit them really quick. So I'm Marley Boxer. I'm the Economic Development Coordinator with the City of Troutdale. We've got David Berniker, our Community Development Director, Randy Lauer, our Mayor, Abe Farkas, our consultant, Tanny Stephenson, our Planning Commission Chair, and Jordan Whitman, our Town Center Advisory Board Chair. And we are very grateful to have you here today. We know you have a presentation for us to go through. Some of the presentation is going to answer a lot of these initial questions, but if you do answer more of those questions, we can sort of modify how that lays out and which questions are still remaining. We do want to save the last 30 minutes for some final follow-up questions with you guys. So I'll turn it over to you guys and thank you again for being here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Marley. It's been nice coordinating with you through the last 6 months or so as we've gotten to this point. So I'm Paul Del Vecchio. I'm kind of be spearheading this. I'll introduce everyone on our side. So we have 4 kind of main team members, companies represented here. So I represent Ethos Development. We're a Portland-based development company that's active in Portland and the South Sound region. Largely build multifamily, some retail, and some of urban mixed-use stuff. Connected to Ethos is also, we have a kind of family of companies. We have a brokerage company that does leasing. We also have a property management company. So kind of with that comes other services that will live with the building going forward. Hacker, who it seems that some of you know well. There's Corey Martins here representing Hacker. I brought Anders Meyer, who's, there's a question specifically about project manager, and I wasn't sure how that was defined, so I literally brought who we would intend to put on this job. He's a development director with Ethos and lives just up the hill here. So he drives by the site every day, twice at least. Bryn Perry is representing Bremick Construction, who I'm sure you all know, but was founded here in Troutdale. And on Zoom, we have Ami Ziff and Grant Scott with Time Equities, who is, we're presenting as a JV partnership here. As I'm sure you all know, but they own the outlet mall, which is adjacent to the site. So I'll turn it over to Corey, who's going to walk through kind of the physical aspects of this. Spacebar.
Okay, and so you asked us to talk about the vision for the site a little bit, and you've seen our proposals, so you'll see more detail in there. And just given the time today, we just wanted to quickly highlight the main things that we think are key to that. The first thing that we think is really important is that we've got to figure out a way to extend the downtown experience to this site. It's so close to it. Some of the development concepts that we saw before looked more like a suburban paradigm. They didn't seem like they were trying to relate directly to downtown Troutdale. And so we feel it's really important to bring the form and continuity of that experience to this site. The other thing that we think is important is that we've got to create space for community. We've got to create places where people feel comfortable and there's active urban experiences that people feel like they want to go see and be a part of. And the third thing we think that's really important is just find a way to really authentically connect people to nature here. That's kind of an overall paradigm of all the work that we do at Hacker is we're trying to find ways that we can connect people in meaningful ways to the amazing landscapes that we have the opportunity to work within. And this site is no different. This is an amazing gateway to one of the best natural resource assets we have in the entire region. And so when we say extend the experience of downtown Troutdale, we mean this. We mean look at the grid of downtown Troutdale and pull some form, some continuity of that layout across the train tracks to this site. So that means sidewalks, storefronts, front stoops of townhomes, following a grid that feels like a continuation of the downtown Troutdale grid as much as you can. But because this site is shaped differently, it's not just an open rectangle, right? You have to figure out a way to adapt it and to tweak those street layouts so that they address the river at the same time. And so what we're proposing here is that we take the water tower as kind of a pivot point for the whole thing and have one of the main streets intersect it and then turn toward the river perpendicular to it. So you have this plaza on the water tower that's part of the street grid kind of shift. When we say create space for community, we mean create large public space. So create a plaza right along the water tower, right in the middle there. You can see that yellow highlighted zone right there. So we're proposing to build our largest, most active spaces along a public plaza that's built around the water tower, and to consider making the water tower a central feature, possibly integrating art into it. There's a great example in West Memphis, Tennessee, that's worth checking out, where a water tower was adaptively changed into a large-scale public art project. Something like that can be really great for Troutdale and just represent what's happening here and become kind of an icon and destination for this site. So when we say community space, we also mean different scales of community space. There's this public plaza right on the river at the river takeout, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there's also opportunities for some open space along some of the main streets that we're considering pulling through from the outlet mall and then from downtown to create some open space that's flexible public landscape space around some of the buildings. And then also to create different scaled community space inside some of the blocks. So in this location right here, this is inside some of the proposed townhomes. Creating a space like this, you can see this project that we did in Central Oregon in Bend, the base camp townhomes, where we actually created a public asset to that development right in the middle of it. And so just creating these different scales and these really active spaces is what we're trying to do. Oops. So when we say connect people to nature, what we mean is figure out a way to design the buildings along the riverfront so that they address the riverfront. Don't just put normal buildings along that, shape the building so that they conform to the flow of the river and that they orient views up and down the river in interesting ways. Make them dynamic forms, make them feel like they're flowing along the river, and then also find ways on those buildings to create assets, roof gardens, roof terraces, major public amenities, amenity spaces along those buildings kind of punctuated along that entire riverfront And then also when we first kind of started talking about this project, we thought, what is this place? It really is a gateway. And with the new bike trail being built to Hood River, as a cyclist ourselves, a lot of us as cyclists, we thought, what better way to connect this place to that asset than to start thinking about how this could be a hub for all of the activities that are already happening here and that people come here for. And so this idea of creating an outfitter kind of retail location along the plaza that has access for river takeout or put in, and connection to the trails that lead both to downtown and then to this new trail all the way out 84. What a better way to activate this space in this public plaza than to have an active tenant kind of retail focused on that in this space. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul.
Now we're on for question 4, which addresses a sensitivity to low-cost apartments and generic design. I think, one, it's not on my talking points, but it seems that many of you know who Hacker is, what that firm is about. And just the fact that's what we're bringing to the table, I think says something about how we're envisioning this site and what this can be. I think beyond their portfolio and what Hacker does, what we are planning is important. Only about 50% of the multifamily units are envisioned to be walk-up, meaning you'd enter via stairs from the outside. Which I think that's the topology that you might think of as generic or inexpensive. And even within that topology, there are good and bad versions of it. And what we've shown here are a few examples.
Red button.
Flip
it over.
Oops. So this one here, top right, and this is a quote unquote garden style walk-up product. So is this. It doesn't look anything like what you might envision as a garden style product. Slightly more expensive, a whole lot more kind of design forward, and it's largely achieving the same construction efficiencies. So that's why we've split the site. About the other 50% is going, we're envisioning as elevator served. They're really very comparable to what you'd see in an urban environment, kind of a mixed use building. So it will likely be, we don't know exactly how that pans out, between 4 and 6 stories, retail on the ground floor, the type of stuff that you'd expect in sort of a higher cost market. We're blending it to get a combination of scales and price points and construction efficiencies. So that the site isn't just one thing, but even sort of the least expensive version, we're showing an example here of how we might execute. And in materiality and design language, the kind of different types of buildings, be it the hospitality building or the commercial buildings that we're planning, the walk-up apartments, the lower-rise stuff, and the mid-rise stuff, the materiality and the quality would all be the same. So the interior finishes would be the same, and the types of exterior materials we'd use would be the same. And then I think the last piece, is if you look at the body of work that Time Equities has produced, that Ethos has produced, Hacker and Bremick have produced, I'm certain that no one would take exception to any one project. I would challenge you to find a project that you wouldn't think would fit well here in any of our team members' body of work. So I think if you're looking for a quality execution, this is the right group of people for it. So moving on to the kind of question number 5 on mix of uses, I'm going to turn it over to Ami, who's on Zoom. Ami, if you're able, you can grab the reins here.
Great. Yeah, sorry, we're on number. I was managing 2 calls I had to fit on. But it's nice to see all of you, although I can't see everyone so well. But I see, I think, a friend in the audience, Ray. So I'll talk to you a little bit about just sort of our vision and just sort of the vision of access and the hospitality aspect of it. And let me just start by mentioning, I don't think anyone here has ever driven through a neighborhood and said, gosh, I wish there were cars driving a lot faster here so that people felt safer and, just able to just beeline straight in and straight out. I live on a busy street in Westchester, and I can tell you that that's my biggest grievance of where I live, having young children. It's a major danger. And to the extent that, you can slow traffic down and impede traffic, that's always our priority with any sort of a residential setting. And, so that sort of speaks to access, which I know a lot of folks over the years have discussed blowing a hole through the Time Equity Zone shopping center. And for a multitude of reasons, we think that that's not the best course of action. But anyways, as we look to develop this new neighborhood for everyone who lives locally, we have a portfolio that spans 8 or 10 countries and 36 states, and it's vast and wide, and we're in discussions with hospitality chains all over the country, coast to coast, in particular at various malls that we own with excess land. And so to the extent we can find someone that sees this as the opportunity that we're seeing, we'll find them. We're in discussions with those folks every week. Previously, while it's not our main business to develop hotel, we have built the Thompson Hotel in Toronto. Rick, you might be able to comment on some of the other hotels we've done, but surely we have experience with them. And ultimately, this will probably end up being, if they do come here, the flag that would come here would be some sort of a ground lease, net lease, where they would do a lot of their own interior fit out.
Great. So yeah, I can speak a little bit to the kind of other kind of more granular stuff on the site. I mean, Corey mentioned the idea of an outfitter. We're seeing the retail here being kind of very specific to the site. So this idea of some outdoor outfitter that's going to leverage where it is, other uses you'd expect, like coffee shop type uses, cafe type uses that may draw some folks in, may pick up passersby that are enjoying the river, can serve the people that are living, working, or visiting the site for hospitality use, and then obviously the kind of various forms of residential, from townhome up through elevator served apartment. So how do we get there? How do we go from where we are today to that vision? You asked a question about timeline. We've shown something here. This is a bit speculative. The further you get away from today, the less concrete this is. But it's an idea of where we think, what we think we can do. And this is assuming that infrastructure and vertical development are designed and permitted in parallel, right? And I got one smile there. That doesn't always happen, right? So, but it can happen. We're actually doing it in Portland right now, and that's Portland, and they have some challenges in staying organized. I don't think Troutdale has. So maybe what we're looking at is that the infrastructure shifts, that's kind of the dotted line that moves to the left, exists for infrastructure, and that we're kind of building outside access, and then we move into vertical. But we think that this is an achievable path here with, collaboration and partnership from the city in moving permits quickly. So it gets, on the outside here, we've got 39 months, and the inside 29 months. So maybe you're seeing a range of deliveries inside that period, kind of the earlier parts of phase one, moving to the later parts of phase one. So this is sort of a broad brush, and as we get more granular, we can obviously hone in on this. I'm going to turn it over to Brent to speak a little more about how we might phase more specifically within this.
Okay. For multiple reasons, it makes sense to kind of look at the south part of the site and to build toward the north. And if you wanted to kind of call it two phases, again, that's what the orange dotted line might represent, to really focus on that area and get that under construction and then kind of build your way out of the site. You may have market may push something forward or back. Maybe the hotel does happen earlier, et cetera, or maybe it does make sense to, again, the two buildings that are undefined, complementary commercial. Again, what are those going to be? Are they townhomes? Are they going to be commercial? And we'll somewhat let that dictate. But this is our kind of our first thought would be to start at the south and then work your way out. And again, infrastructure, we see taking that on as part of our scope, where we would be building that. And then all somewhat happening simultaneously. And then everything will change and we'll adjust to it. Anyway, that's our current plan right now.
I guess speaking to Brent's point about uncertainty, the other, I think, benefit of moving south to north is just that we understand the need for multifamily much better than we understand the need for hospitality and commercial use. And we want to execute the vision that the city has. So, putting a little space between whatever is happening, kind of in the global high-level economic world at the moment, and when those two other uses get planned is a good thing.
Yeah.
So moving from kind of known to unknown, it also gives us time to find tenants. I mentioned that brokerage is in-house, so it would be sort of top of mind for us to find the right folks to occupy complementary commercial, which is the way we're envisioning that is some of it could be work live and some of it could be kind of like a light industrial with a storefront. So we're picking up a breadth of various kinds of uses. I think I'm skipping ahead, that we get into that a little bit later. So I'll expand on that when we get to the actual question. Now this is was getting to site improvement. So this indicates one piece that would have to happen first to provide access. And there was a question here about what public improvements would be required to support our company the first phase. This is the answer. That's absolutely necessary because it gets you from outside the site to inside the site. Beyond that, we can run it with with the adjacent vertical development that's underway at the time. So the next question here, this one, you said, do you anticipate the first phase having a positive residual land value, and are you prepared to speculate on price? So we had that teed up for Ami. So Ami, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, this is a difficult answer at any given time because the financial markets are evolving so quickly. So, for instance, your treasury rate was 4% last time I checked this morning, and it was half that 18 months ago, and we're not sure where it's going next. So the answer is, at this moment in time, based on our experience being in the ground, building in Chicago, Florida, close to being in the ground in California on some projects, our investors and our capital, requires, given where the rents are, construction costs are, the cost to finance these projects, there really isn't any meaningful land value that works to actually have someone professional spend their time building this project and building the project that we know you guys want to see and the quality that we know you want to see. That's just based on our experience. Maybe someone else has different math, and maybe someone else can work off of different interest rates or wants to work for free. But I think that's a recipe for disaster, and I think you'll end up getting what you pay for.
Yeah, and just to dovetail into that, we took an opportunity to review the other proposals, and one of them seems to be leveraging the idea of a tax exemption to pay. So that's basically just the government financing its own payment, right? So you all have two pockets, you can move the money from one to the other. That's what that offer is. Their answer is the same as what Ami just said. They're just saying it differently. So, yeah, moving on. I think so for us, maybe I can expand a little bit on site improvements. It is our intention, just to be clear here, to build and dedicate. So that's kind of going along the lines of what Corey was getting at, extending downtown. We would want to leverage TIF funding to the extent possible where it might apply, and build the public improvements and dedicate them back. So ultimately, when this is done, we'd have many tax lots that looks like an extension of downtown. So it's literal in how the land is owned and operated, in addition to how it's laid out. So I guess that concludes the first section. Now we're into the conversation questions component. So should we keep going, or do you want to drive that part and we'll provide answers?
Whatever you guys think is best for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have in the same format.
Actually, if you don't mind, but I don't know if the team has any questions that they might want to ask on that first phase that they've talked about.
Yeah.
And I had one myself.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Brent, right?
Yeah.
So you talked about the team will take on the infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit more about what you were thinking in terms of that? I mean, I heard the statement. I wasn't quite sure I know what you meant.
Sure. The sewer line that's ran through the site would be installed by us. The curbs, the sidewalks, we would actually take all of that on as part of the overall development. As far as who actually builds it, I'll let Paul figure out how you guys fund it, et cetera. But from rather than there's other developments where the city's putting the street in, and when the street is done, then I can drive across it. That would be. And obviously the city's probably not doing it. They're going to contract that out to somebody else. So we will take that contract and we will build that.
And what's the benefit of that, Brent?
There's multiple benefits. Don't build a street to a standard that's going to have concrete trucks driving across it for a year, and it'll be beat up and chewed up. And then we've got a street that's tired. So we may look at it and say, we're going to build a haul road through there, and that's going to get our concrete trucks there because we know that they're going to beat up the asphalt roads. That curb, I don't want to put that curb in because that will be in the way of my forklift or whatever. And so we can put it in when it makes sense, and when it's not going to be, we're not going to build it twice. And so I think it's really is the most economical way to do it. So we build it again, just like any other large development that we have full ownership of. So
is it fair to say that you're managing all the infrastructure pieces, storm, sewer,
Yep.
I mean, as part of that? Okay, and so what you're saying is you guys you're taking on, you're managing it. That's super
Yep.
helpful.
Yeah.
I guess the related question about that maybe is just how you're seeing who does what between the city and you guys as it relates to that.
Well, we'd have to permit it, obviously. So there'd be a substantive public works permit here that would run we're proposing in parallel to some of the vertical permits, maybe slightly advanced, because there's some tax lot questions and how we submit a permit for a parcel that doesn't yet exist for the vertical, and we have to iron that out. There are answers to those questions and various ways to do it, but that nut has to get cracked. Our intention is to, and from the financing perspective, we're proposing to use TIF funds for the public improvements, but we can do it much cheaper. Not only is our sort of contracting mechanism different than a government body's, when you have the same excavator that is tasked with grading the road and grading the site next to it,
right.
It's going to be cheaper.
Absolutely.
There's a huge advantage there. So we've basically got two earthwork contracts here, phase one and phase two. There would be many if it were kind of done in the way that the government takes on infrastructure and then completes it to some level and turns over. I'm not sure that you ever even envision that being the case, but that is a path that's common for this kind of a scenario. So we don't think that's the right one because of the scale of this and the efficiencies that can be created by doing it with one group.
And then isn't the schedule somewhat dependent on this efficiency
Yes.
too? There's probably no way we could do it if everything had to be built first before Grant could come in and start work.
Yeah, at the speed of government contracting, it would probably be a 2-year delay to getting, because we'd have to do all that in sequence. That's one part, and then part of it would take longer than it would take, private actors for contracting. So I think there's I don't know if I got directly your question, sort of a shotgun type approach to an answer.
I appreciate that. Do any of you guys have any additional questions? Dave?
Right. So if you're going to take on the infrastructure, which I think is actually a good idea in a number of ways, because I've worked on projects where the private sector has done that, and you're right, it is cheap for the bidding process and all that other stuff. But the project is likely going to be prevailing, boldly prevailing. Does that have an impact on the rest of the vertical development that you're laying out?
No, we should be able to isolate them.
Yeah, there's, I'd say the only impact might be on anything more than 4 stories.
Mm-hmm.
If I have that height right, because then you get into commercial prevailing.
Right, yeah.
So there are some questions. So we have to make sure we segment, get the small stuff built, because the residential prevailing is not that much different than market wages here.
Right. But yeah, your mixed use stuff where you've got retail on the ground floor is probably going to prevail. Is that?
Possibly commercial, depending on the height of the building.
Yeah, right now there's
Depending on
2
the funding
buildings,
source, too.
maybe 3 that we show being high enough.
We'd also like to, peel that onion back a little bit and understand why your opinion is that it would be prevailing, and see if there's any other avenues.
Having had some bad experiences recently with Bowley, got to be careful here.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, if you want to move forward with the conversation questions, if you have it laid out in your, presentation, and we don't need to ask them, that's fine, or we can go around and ask them.
Well, I can just read off the questions we were asked in the written document. You can modify them if. So the first one was, what are 2 or 3 challenges you see in developing the site and implementing your vision? How do you propose overcoming those challenges, and what role do you see the city playing in assisting? So we've already gotten into permitting timeframes. That's a challenge, all over the place, all over the region. We're working, and it's just, there's been a lot of construction recently. So it's been taxing permitting bodies. So having the city be a partner there and work to move our permits through as we need them. That'll be a live conversation, which ones are important when. We're not intending to just tell you they're all important all the time, because it's not going to be true. And then the inspection version of that, making sure that we're just getting attention. Soliciting community involvement is going to be important here. And this is it's a big project for Troutdale, and we want to make sure that's done correctly and thoughtfully, and we want to do it with the city. Hacker has a lot of experience working on civic projects. That's different from the rest of the parties that are here, and Abremic has some public experience also. Ethos and Time are commercial parties, so our engagement processes are going to reflect that. So some combination of our team members can approach this from sort of a kind of a civic / commercial perspective, and I think given the scale and the meaning of this, that's appropriate. So we want the city to work with us on that, because it's a group thing. There's the kind of city part, the community part, and then us as the builders. And then the last piece is we don't know how DEQ or the railroad will show up in this, but they will. So we have to be a unified voice between the city and our group, and having attention and the willingness to get on the same page before we approach whatever the issue is. That'll be another way to help. Ami or Richard, do you have anything to add to this?
in terms of the intangibles on the financing and the contracting. On the financing side, from our perspective, there's three key reasons why interest rates for this project will be better than most people. First, the project, I think, speaks for itself. Second is our ability to execute on projects in general is well regarded in the financing industry. We had 50 West Street get financed at a time when only 4 projects in all of Manhattan were financed, and we received 1 of 4 construction loans at that time, which speaks to the lender's confidence in our ability to execute. More recently, we were given 1 of a loan in Chicago for a high rise that we're building there from another lender who said they're only giving out 1 loan in the whole city, and that was ours. Again, testament to our ability to execute. So our ability to execute is a relationship driven matter with our lenders. And as a result, they view our projects to be more favorable. And because they view them more favorable, they're perceived to have less risk. So the interest rates generally tend to be better. Second, because of our mass, we also get better interest rates. We're consistently entering into joint ventures, and people who price out their joint venture costs always are finding that because of our relationships and our mass with the lenders, we get better interest rates than they can get. And I think the same will hold in this case. In terms of the risk, we've already spoken about that. I think that our ability to execute on any project of any scale in the new construction side speaks for itself, and the risk will mitigate a lot of other factors in our ability to carry this out. On the construction side, again, our mass is able to get pricing that many other smaller companies cannot get. We have national buying programs for many materials that we bring into various construction sites that drive down the cost of material and make the projects more viable, and again, mitigates the risk that I spoke of in the financing part of this, so that it drives down that risk, which then affects the interest rate. So I think you'll not find anybody among your list of submitters for this RFP who have the ability and scale to, because of our reputation, because of our history, that can control these elements as well as we do.
Thanks, Richard.
Just real quick, I'm gonna have Jordan ask the next portion of the question, and we will just have our team ask those, just so that you don't feel like you're talking the whole entire time.
Great, go for it.
Bit of break from talking. So Jordan, if you want to ask the second part of that question.
On the, how you propose or what role do you see the city playing in assisting?
No, sorry, we're under the second part of conversation questions.
But we never really answered any part of that, city assisting them.
That's where I was going with helping with DEQ and the kind of permitting assistance.
Just as a one voice kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So then,
I was just referring to the top question.
yeah, can you elaborate on how you envision infrastructure costs being covered? Are these specific elements that you are asking the city to participate in, or have the city pay for infrastructure costs to the project?
Yes, so we touched on this a little bit previously. We do intend to utilize the funds for the TIF from the TIF district here. Some of the specific upgrades that might apply, the I-84 on-ramp, I think needs to be modified, if I remember correctly, in one of the reports. We'd obviously want to study that in more detail to understand if that is in fact the case. 257th Way will certainly need to be upgraded, so that would be covered, and streets to be dedicated within the within the site itself, along with public utilities. The private utilities get paid for separately. And then public uses that may or may not get dedicated. So that's, I think there's a question there, but the Water Tower Plaza, for example, could be an actual public plaza, or it could be a private plaza with public access. We don't know how that will unfold, but if it's actually public, then funds could go to something like that. We will get to the details of this, but we've proposed a pedestrian connection through the outlet mall. It's another potential use for TIF funds. And then the last piece, and we asked a question about this, is whether or not there would be a parking structure. If that concept is still alive, we've shown a parking lot where it was roughly where it was drawn in the renderings we saw. That parking lot, if it were public, might be the beneficiary of TIF funds. It could also not be, right? It could be that that's a private parking lot, or maybe it's more buildings. I think there's other ways where other directions this goes, but we didn't want to show buildings where you showed a parking lot, so we put this forward. So yeah, that's the entirety of our answer on that one. If you have follow-up questions or.
Yeah, actually, I've got a follow-up question. So you mentioned TIF a couple of times. I love TIF, but the city currently has very, very limited tax increment available. So the question for you is, what other creative public resources have you worked with, or would you recommend being employed here to help deal with the infrastructure challenge?
Yeah, aside from, I don't know, bond measures are obviously an option, right? That's a tough one that needs some long lead.
Yeah.
To the extent that we can be helpful, we'd be happy to work with you on it. We can possibly leverage public utilities themselves as an option. I think there is a way that we could get kind of public-private partnership type of financing for it, where it looks like a private loan, but it's the city's.
Yeah.
So we can possibly procure something, a vehicle like that. We're certainly willing to get creative on it. Sure. If the TIF funds don't get us the entirety of the way.
Yeah, they wouldn't get you the entire way. I wish they would, but it's just reality. So have you ever worked with, I assume that Bremick has been involved with LIDs, where basically, you're getting an assessment, but you're getting it at a very deep discounted rate?
An LID I have been involved with them. It requires the city to execute, and then puts lends the money to the property owner. So you're paying it at some rate, we call it 5% over some period of time. So I think that would actually might make the problem worse, because it requires the city coming up with the money to execute, and then putting a note on our property. And I think the practicality is here that we probably have to do the inverse somehow, where we're coming up with the money and the city's finding a way to repay it over time.
Right, yeah, you're often, we don't have to go into this in detail, but there's sometimes creative ways to make the repayment a lot easier, but the interest rate's quite low.
Yes, yeah.
Right, okay. We're just trying to find ways to get infrastructure done. So.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a creative collaboration there, for sure.
Actually, one other question. So together you all have done a great deal of development. So you just describe a previous project where you've run into an unanticipated problem that nobody has put on the table. You're working with your public partner. How did you resolve that one?
And that sounds like every project.
I was thinking, where do I start?
Yeah, the business we're in, the whole thing is unforeseen. We're all change agents. Every flavor of this has happened, be it unforeseen change to your kind of financing structure at the 11th hour, and you're scrambling to replace the debt or some equity, or you find hazardous materials where you didn't think it was, and the probe you'd made was 1 foot too shallow, and turns out there was something down there. So you're scrambling to work with the DEQ, work with your excavator, work with all your other subcontractors to push them back. That has happened to us twice in the last 6 months. We had a contractor go bankrupt, Katerra, some of you may have heard of that. It's a giant bankruptcy. It was on a project in Tacoma. They hit the bottom of our hole and went bankrupt. They sloped out the grades to make it safe and walked. Got a call on Thursday. They were leaving on Friday. We were back in the ground 6 weeks later with a new contractor.
And that was a partner project, right? To the city?
No, not at that stage. We were on our own there, but we have a very good relationship with the city of Tacoma. I'm involved in government there. That was a huge obstacle that was overcome. Brent or Corey, if you have some war stories.
Just one that comes to mind. When we renovated the White Stag block, you can kind of picture where that's located at. You have Nato Parkway on one side, the Max Lanes on the other side of the building, the Burnside Bridge on the other side. And one example, we spent 6 months working with the city, with PBOT and PGE on where the transformer was going to go. It literally moved about 8 different times in the street, in the sidewalk. No, can't go on the sidewalk. Let's put it under the bridge. No, can't do that because you can't lift it out. We ended up building it inside of the building ultimately, and everybody signed off on that. But we had more meetings with PBOT and PGE about where is that going to go. The logistics of lifting mechanical units onto the rooftop and working with ODOT on how we're going to do this and not punch a hole through the Burnside Bridge because of the load, and just things like that. Again, as Paul said, pick a project. There's always coordination again, that's what it takes. It takes people working together going, here's a problem, let's figure it out. And that's what it takes, is an attitude of let's figure it out. If you have that attitude, you get it figured out.
I think the key thing for us, because that's the truth, is that you have to know that that's going to happen no matter what. And when you're designing and you're thinking about concepts and vision for your project, you have to think carefully about how far you can push things. We're always trying to push the design farther than we can really go. That's just built into us, right? But we also know that because reality is going to hit, we have to make sure that we have a contingency built in the design, both conceptually and literally financially, right? That we don't overthink this thing and overdo this thing, that we keep it as simple as possible. And the more and more work that we do, especially in the public realm, the thing that we learn over and over again is that the more simple things can be, the better. You've just got to go for the essential ideas that will make the project sing and make the structures and the layout and the master plan and all the design ideas as simple as they can possibly be. And there's beauty in that, right? Mm-hmm. Don't overthink it, but do a few things really well, but only pick a few things. Like for this project, make the waterfront and the shape of the buildings really beautiful along the river, and make that plaza this signature part of Troutdale that you can use forever to signify what Troutdale is. But don't make it so complex that when you run into whatever issues we know we're going to run into, that it breaks the project.
Okay. David?
Yeah, Brent talked about phase 1 development and that largely being residential. And so my question is, as you guys know, is how has the current state of the market influenced your development program? And do you see changes in the next 1 to 3 years that would make you adjust your thinking or approach? So given what we have today, looking forward, what do you guys say?
We had this one teed up for Ami, so if you want to take the reins, Ami.
Actually, I'm going to be the one who handles this one.
Okay.
Any project you do, you already heard, I forget who was saying it, everything involves change. You never know where anything is going to go. You always start off at a starting point, and sometimes your end point is your starting point, but typically it's not. So, I mean, I can describe projects, some of them I've already alluded to in my prior discussion. One was 50 West Street as an example, which is a high rise here that we built in Manhattan. The project started off as the lower half was a hotel, the upper half was a condo. We spent tons of money on the assumption that that would be the ending point. Well, the market changed, the financing markets changed, And I think one of the other things that we're good at is staying on top of these changes and these morphings. And in this case, we stayed on top of the fact that the markets for providing financing for hotels dried up, and there was markets that were coming around for condos. So we changed the project from half hotel to half condo to all condo, and we got a loan to build the building. But then even as we built the building, the market changed again. And so while we were selling condos, the condo market was drying up for the higher end condos, and we sold what we could sell, but then we switched to a combination of condos and rentals, luxury rentals. And to this day, we're still renting units in this building as luxury rentals with ever eclipsing rents, beating the last record that we set in our own building. In the case of the building that we're in the throes of building in Chicago and 1,000 South Michigan, the building started off also as condos. And then as we're in the throes of designing, the financing markets changed, the market itself changed so that there wasn't as much demand for condos. So we changed to micro units. And so instead of having a lender give us money for building a building for condos, we found a different lender for building a building with micro units. And we're now putting up the building. We're already pre-renting in construction some of the micro units. So those are two examples of projects that have starting points that are different than the ending points, and even during the projects morphing again. Can I say that this project will morph? Probably. What pieces of it will morph depends on the market. As many different changes as we've seen in the markets over the course of the last 4 years, including COVID, where you saw retail become not the flavor of the month to becoming the flavor of the month again, from rental apartments being the flavor of the month to now people are saying, well, maybe rental markets are going to start to soften because rents have been rising too high. But you know what? Then you can decrease the size of the units and maintain the same rents and maybe make the project a success like our micro project in Chicago. So it's inevitable that markets will change and exterior factors that we can and cannot control will change to cause projects to change. And we adapt to them, and we're very good at that and identifying the changes as they occur to still finish the project. And I think the goal here should not be necessarily what project you're going to end up with. The goal should be what project is going to be built and how certain it is it's going to be built. And I think you can find that there's very few people good at morphing projects and making sure they get built than us.
Appreciate that.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Something I think that's really important to this project specifically is that by laying out the plan in this way, in a more kind of basic urban format, you create inherent flexibility as all the things that Richard was talking about happen. Because these sites are flexible, this inherent layout is flexible. That's the whole point of it. That's why downtowns work on all aspects over long periods of time. So make a flexible site design.
Appreciate that. I'm not going to try to repeat all the questions. I think you guys spoke a little bit to the notions on interest rates. If you want to speak to that, you can. And I think Grant just spoke to the notions of flexibility in the market. So if you want to talk about, you're thinking about retail and hospitality, we welcome it, but again, don't need to be redundant here. So Paul, hand it off to you.
I'll
Yep.
comment on that. So, Time Equities has a major retail business. We own almost 11 million square feet of retail, and that retail is spread across 27 states today and growing. And we own 165,000 foot shopping center, as you're all aware, as your neighbor. So, from a national, regional, and local perspective, I would say we're as good or better than any other retail operator in the country. We know we have access to all the tenants. We think we have a pretty good feel for where they want to be and what format, and we've tried to lay out, what we believe this site can handle in that regard. From a hospitality standpoint, the hospitality and retail have sort of merged in today's world, because at our sites, they have become town centers, just as you have. You have the downtown, but this will be a hub. This whole development will be a new town center for the community in Troutdale. So as we've seen that convergence, we've seen hotel operators wanting to be at retail sites and retail owners welcoming hotel operators because they bring daily traffic and consumers that are spending money. So that's a long way of saying, I think we're overqualified to handle, identifying appropriate retail businesses to lease any potential retail space. We're surely going to have to be flexible based on who we find, where the market goes. But as we've all described here, I think we're well qualified and healed to do that. And from a hotel standpoint, we're just having these discussions sort of all the time on a continuous basis about growing different brands within our footprint, within our portfolio. We've even had discussions with operators that have expressed interest in our overall site, in this site, while adding a hotel doesn't work at Columbia Gorge Outlets, it could work next door. So I think we have a pretty good sense of who wants to be here, and I think we're overqualified to locate and identify and secure those groups.
Is it fair to say, thank you, is it fair to say that your approach includes engaging local retail, local entrepreneurs, those types of folks? I surely understand the larger portfolio.
100%.
Okay.
I'll just mention one thing. We own a big portfolio that went through a complicated quarter during COVID. March, April, May, a little bit of June. Most tenants around the country were not paying rent. In the state of Oregon, there was an executive order that precluded us and every other retail landlord from defaulting tenants, charging any late fees on rent. There were also stays on not having an obligation to pay our mortgages, which we did not do. So we had no rent coming in, and we were still staying current with all of our lenders. But the takeaway is, during COVID, basically most people didn't pay rent. Then we went to work trying to collect rents, as the dust settled and folks around the country realized the world was not going to end yet. And our experience coming out of COVID was that the local and regional tenants, portfolio-wide, coast to coast, were every instance more credible and paid rent quicker, were more honest, transparent about their business and about their needs. And we worked with each individual tenant to try to address those needs. But the takeaway we had was that local and regional tenants actually, through COVID, when times were really tough, were more credible than the national tenants that were publicly traded and had $1 billion in cash on their balance sheet. And we could see the cash, and they were withholding because they had a team of attorneys that could drag us out and fight us. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we've majorly value local and regional businesses in addition to their creditworthiness, because they are the makeup of this new community center that you're going to create. And without them, it'll have no identity and no flavor.
One of the other things that I would just say is that I think that the makeup of the team also has us very well suited to deal with this, and we basically can encompass kind of all of those scales. So the brokerage side of our business is obviously working with lots of small local tenants throughout the Portland area. And then I also think that my proximity to the community, other people kind of in Corbett and into Troutdale, relationships that I have with Sugar Pine or other existing local businesses like that, I think also provides an opportunity to kind of engage their networks, the people that they know who might be interested in spaces, and be able to kind of get those conversations going, early and bring those people in from the get-go.
Hey, guys, I'm going to just say that we're getting kind of tight on time, so we want to get through our questions, but you can be cognizant of that, because we do want to have time to ask you some follow-ups. So,
Are you wanting to move to the next section of questions and then come
No.
back, or?
no, I think we just keep
carrying through?
going.
Okay.
So, Tanny?
It sounds like you're gonna be doing most of the build out, and will you be building all of the housing?
We're building everything. Yeah, okay, I mean, you can,
Yeah, sure. So, these market studies are commissioned by us, and they're recommissioned and over again as the market changes, depending on what our timeline is for delivery. But our preference is to build rentals, because it'll be better for everyone. You won't have to go deal with another landlord. You'll have the same professionals that you're speaking to now as your point of contact. But we got to see where the market goes and be willing to be flexible and nimble. And whether that's a combination of townhomes or rentals, we would be doing the construction and overseeing all of that, our collective team. And we would just sort of recommission our market studies as we get closer and determine what the market can bear.
Thank you.
So you've talked about engaging local and outfitters and, but if you've really done your due diligence, I'll say with local here, we're really curious to see what else are you gonna bring, a little more detail. What else are you gonna bring to Troutdale? What else are you thinking besides, craft breweries or whatnot?
yeah, I mean, if you're looking for the name of a business, we can't provide that to you at this stage. And what I can say is just we touched on the last question, the kind of breadth of scale here. We're going from one of the largest retail landlords in the country down to, I literally own a food cart pot and leased the food carts myself. Right, so that is about the biggest span you're going to get, and so the Migration brewery in Gresham, we did that deal, and we put them in Gresham, right? So we specifically kind of advocated for that execution in that location. That was a groundbreaking use for that kind of a site in that kind of a market. We can do that here. We our brokerage company represents many of the major local breweries and beverage operators in the region. We are very comfortable with the ability to execute on something that everybody wants. There's lots of other uses that can go in here. You've got fitness uses fit in light industrial space, Pilates, yoga type stuff. It's very community enhancing. Creative agencies fit in light industrial. Communal kitchens, that's a kind of a nascent use that support local restaurants or restaurants that are only takeout. You've got work-live type things, professional services, CPA, mortgage brokers, salons, tech office, remote work, satellite office. There's a lot of use, between sort of the work-live format and the small light industrial format. There are a lot of uses that can plug and play in here. And I think we're going to try to stay away from something that is built specifically for a flashy tenant, because that's not flexible. And showing you one tenant whose logo you like, hey, might sound good, but I think long term is not what's best for the site.
Okay.
So that kind of ties into this next question. So throughout this process of coming to a decision as to what we want for this site and the vision and the dream that we have here in Troutdale in the region, we came to the understanding that this community does desire hospitality on this site. It does desire a boutique type hotel here on this site. In your presentation there, it says in asterisk options to become multifamily. Does that change the way you're approaching that? What would be then phase 2 of this development?
No.
So is that then, what's the target market for that hotel?
Just to the phasing question, we're intentionally phasing the more challenging uses to work economically second.
Mhm.
It also physically works better to build south to north because you're kind of deeper into the site. So I think the access also supports that, which is a good thing, right? There's kind of multiple reasons to build south to north. We do see, I think what you consider to be a boutique hotel is getting fuzzy because large brands have boutique flags, right? So it's a, but that is the kind of execution that we would want. We don't want a extended stay Hampton Inn. If that supports your vision or ours. And whatever it is needs to leverage the access that this has, right? I mean, it is near to certain kinds of employment, it is near to the airport, and it is near to recreation.
Mhm.
And so it needs to support all of those things. And I think the near to recreation part really, the idea of more of a boutique flag and execution works well with that. If someone that's here because they're going to FedEx, I don't know that it matters very much, but I don't think they're going to avoid staying in a boutique hotel. I think it still works.
Mhm.
So having it be more of a leisure forward kind of model with a boutique brand is how we're seeing this. And it is. I really want to underline that this team can execute on that development. Right? So we're not just going to parcel it off. I think that's very important because I believe different from some of the other respondents.
Good, thank you.
Good, thanks. Next, so you talked about selling the site, I think that's a preference, but the city's also exploring possible interest in a long-term ground lease. What's your perspective on that? Is that something you might be willing to consider?
Given what Ami spoke to about value, it's hard for us to understand why that vehicle would be used. It's sort of a more complicated execution, and we don't think it's the best the way to execute on this.
No, I understand that. I think one of the reasons I think cities is looking at that is if the land is sold, it triggers other obligations inside the city. So cooperation and collaboration through that.
If there were a compelling reason, and we can sort of tie it to other benefits or moving parts. I mean, it's a conversation I think we'd be willing to have. Or at face value, all other things being equal, the answer is it's probably not the best. Yes.
So this has been really important to the community, as you know, all along. And so what's your public engagement strategy? How do you plan to partner with the community?
I mean, there's, kind of several different kinds of engagement you can have. I mean, you've got as simple as a survey, right? That's one tool. I assume we would use that tool here. Focus groups, community meetings, and there's different scales. A format kind of like this, maybe there'd be more people, but this kind of a room down to living room, right? There's all different versions of it, and we're planning to and willing to employ all of them. And given that there was a master plan already done, presumably there was some work done in that space. So we'd want to understand what happened, how it happened, who the interested parties were, what perspectives perhaps were dissenting, and plug into that, right? So pick up where you left off.
From there. Okay. Thank you.
Great. So I think we're at the part of the conversation we have some more specific questions for you guys. And the question I'm going to pick up on, I think Ami touched on it early on in the discussion, where you said that access through the property It's not a great idea for a multitude of reasons, and didn't quite go into any detail about that. And the town center plan calls for direct access through the outlet mall. I think you guys are familiar with city's desire. Your proposal shows a pedestrian connection. So, why is a complete street not proposed? And would you be willing to consider a complete street, a connection through the outlet mall to the site?
I'll take that one. So if you opened up a street, and again, this is a plan made by someone who doesn't own both properties, and there's a lot of complication in between. So, just sort of start with that. If you open up a street, theoretically, you'd have cars gunning down through the shopping center to get to their house or their recreation activity, and vice versa. Creating spacing and slowing traffic would be our preference in every instance. The idea of blowing up a shopping center with existing tenants and businesses and individuals that work in those businesses is so complicated for so many reasons, and I'll go into them. But I think everyone on this committee has already lived this. They've already done this. They did this with Junkie Yoshida, and the difference between now and then is that your positioning has improved because you now have a neighbor that's here talking to you and trying to be a good neighbor and even trying to work together. So, other than that, you've seen that nightmare, and that didn't go over well. If you guys were to press to open up access, the reality is that there's a mortgage, a securitized mortgage, that encumbers the shopping center today with a lot of duration remaining. And the only way that could theoretically be completed is if you condemn the property, and the entire mortgage would need to be repaid with yield maintenance. We would fight you because as we've said, from day one, since we met with the mayor and Ray, we don't think that that's the best thing for the businesses that are operating there. We think that there's viable access in and around, especially if you're trying to get to your home. And if you had to spend an extra 7 seconds driving your car around, life would continue. And, I think you'd end up in a long, protracted court battle, condemning private property from one person for the benefit of private property for another, which I think has its own set of complications. In terms of what our approach to trying to achieve your vision, given the reality of what's built there, keep in mind, we didn't build this property, we just bought it. We tried to come up with, access points by keeping the structure and working around and with the lender to try to address your needs of flow and activity and folks being able to live, work, play type of situation between the two properties by opening up pedestrian access and making it, feel like one combined site. We understand that this is not a perfect world, but in theory, if these two properties were always owned by the same individual and the shopping center wasn't built, it'd be a lot easier. But that's not the situation we all find ourselves in. In terms of the physical aspect of doing that, it's complicated. All of our MEPs are located on the backside of our shopping center, so it's not as simple as you just cut it and then it's done. It's much more complicated. We've got one roof that goes throughout there. We've got canopies with drainage systems. We've got infrastructure that would have to be impacted and moved for 100,000 square feet of space. It's a major physical undertaking, even if it was financially, and the properties were not encumbered with a mortgage.
Appreciate the answer. Just kind of responding back, would you be still interested or willing to understanding mechanical and MEP and all that stuff's on the back of the building? And I'm not going to speak to the legal part of it. It's a little bit out of my pay scale. But would you be willing to kind of enter into a conversation about the logistics, about how the building could be bifurcated, if you will? You're showing a pedestrian path through it now. The same issues are going to exist, maybe not to the same extent, but would you be willing to have that conversation? And then part two of my question to you is, you made it pretty clear, and I can't agree more, you got a killer team, but I think it's a bit, from my personal perspective as an urban designer, I do question kind of looping around the shopping center to enter into the community. Is that really supporting the vision that you guys are putting forth? Does it really make that vision everything it can and should be?
In what way do you think it'll impair that vision specifically? Rents, desirability to live there? I mean, what way do you believe it's impaired by that?
Oh, I just think I think there's a vision of kind of coming into a community, if you will, and you've talked about open spaces, you've talked about highlighting the water tower, you've talked about a connection of the grid, all these types of elements. And I think looping around to get into this great place, especially when I'm on the back door or back of house going through this, would be, one person's opinion, underwhelming. And I think if there was a way to know if there was an opportunity to have a conversation with you guys, both legal, architectural, urban design, that'd be something that I would be interested in having with you all.
Understood. Well, like a lot of things in life, everyone sees things differently, and that's what makes the world go around. So the house that I just built, where I live with my family, I am looking to create the same situation here that you personally don't have a preference for, which is okay. I don't want you to be able to pull into my driveway and see the whole house. I want to create some allure. I want to create a more dramatic opening so that you sort of have to come through a well-landscaped area, and then all of a sudden you come to the house. The answer to your question is, if we're involved in the project, we are open to continuing a dialogue, keeping in mind that we have widows and orphans that have invested their hard-earned money into this investment, which was done at a time years before this was ever discussed. And we have a fiduciary to protect that capital along with our capital. And so long as we're adhering to that, and we can marry up something that comes close to your vision, we're all ears. And we wouldn't be here if we weren't. So again, I'll reiterate that you have a neighbor who's at the table here looking to have that dialogue. And so long as we're involved and we are in control to some degree of both sites, we're willing to have a dialogue. To the extent you guys take the opposite position, I think you'll find us to be less willing.
Appreciate your answer. Thank you.
So it leads to an interesting follow-up question. So could you talk more about the relationship between the two firms? You've got Ethos, and it's got an incredible local reputation, and you've got Time Equities, which is working all over the world. Is this going to be a partnership between the two of you? Is the primary equity coming out of Time Equities, and you guys are handling the local situation? Just walk us through.
Happy to talk to that. So I don't know how many of you were involved with this process of the RFQ. I believe we both asked for an extension so that we could respond separately, Time Equities and Ethos. Time Equities and Ethos has a prior relationship. This is not, did not meet over this deal. When we realized we were both responding, we very quickly came to the conclusion that doing it together would be a good outcome. So this is a we are joint venture partners. We're different types of firms. Ethos looks a lot like Capstone and Wood Partners in that we spend money on entitling a project. Perhaps we buy land, and then we eventually go get a limited partner to come in as equity as part of what we call a cap stack or capital stack. Time Equities is also a developer. However, they are capable of capitalizing on their own. So this is a joint venture development, but you're getting more than you would have gotten at Ethos, responded alone, because one of the big questions, and a question that frankly exists for Capstone and Wood, where's the equity coming from, and does it have an opinion? Is it going to change what's presented? That question doesn't exist here. Had Time responded alone, I think what you would have gotten was a very well-regarded, well-resourced professional firm operating from New York. And what you've got here is local depth of resources that really care about what happens here. I live between Lake Oswego and Hood River and drive by this thing all the time. Anders drives by it every day. Brent started his business here.
Mike lives just up the road.
Yeah, Brent's partners right up the road here. So we are vested in this community. This is also the local team. So, and it's cradle to grave. This is build to hold here. This is not a merchant build like Wood does. And by the way, the other two respondents are excellent companies. I'm pointing out the differences here. I think everyone gets this done. I think the likelihood of us getting it done and executing per what you're seeing is much higher. In the time frame that we're talking about. So we're joint venture partnerships. We already have a document outlining how we relate to each other. Should we be successful here? And like I mentioned earlier, Ethos comes with Ethos Commercial Advisors and Emeritus Property Group, which that's brokerage and property management. So this is everybody that's going to relate to this thing is sitting right here now and for the next 30 years. Right, so we were planning to own and operate this property. And just to be clear here, it's a JV, but the scale would imply, how the decision making goes. So it's, I think we are all supporting Time. Ethos will have a ownership stake in this, and will probably be the face you see most. But we'd be supporting Time Equities in this. Again, just the major unknown gets erased. There's no questions about the neighboring property owner. There's no question about how this gets executed from a financial perspective.
Just as a quick follow-up, very much appreciate the response that you gave. Because we're interviewing two other teams, if you guys were not selected, and maybe this is more directed at Time Equities, would Time Equities even consider talking with either of the other two teams? And again, no decision's been made, so it's a question we feel we need to ask.
I have to be candid and transparent, and we don't have much interest in having that dialogue. We'll have no control, and it'd be hard for us to go to our investors and our capital and say, hey, here we want control and make these adjustments with benefit.
So basically, it's Time Equities, equity in this thing, and they're basically the lead.
Yeah, it's a joint venture, right? You have kind of two development voices in Ethos and Time.
Yeah.
And then sort of the money part is more Time than Ethos.
Even despite the fact that the money part would be more of our capital than Ethos, we really treat our partners like equals, whether they put in an equal amount of money or not. So Paul is obviously very well known locally, very, very skilled. We have a lot of faith in him, and practically and pragmatically, we're not going to make any decisions without consulting with Paul. So I think you'd find that from your perspective, without knowing the exact details of the capital stack, you might believe after the development's done that Paul was a 50-50 owner in the property. And I think that that's the experience and the takeaway. And that's our approach to this in all of our joint ventures.
To your question about, whether they'd work with other teams,
Yeah.
I think you'd find that there's a business model mismatch between Wood and Time Equities that would preclude that relationship from existing in a meaningful way.
Right.
And there's probably an approach to the site and a lack of relationship for the other respondent.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, there was JV partnerships of this magnitude don't just appear. I think the fact that there was some pre-existing business that has occurred is a meaningful part of the story here.
Yeah, we just wanted to get some clarity on this stuff, so yeah, thanks very much.
So you said this isn't your first joint venture with?
It would be our first joint venture.
It would be?
We have other lines of business. One of them is a brokerage company. So we've worked with Time in that capacity.
But this would be the first?
Yeah, the first time we're coming to the table, as an equity player or something of equal.
Okay, thank you.
Yours,
Yeah, we kind of already answered that last question, so. All right, so we'll turn it over to you guys if you have any questions for us. I know you had sent some in advance, but if you just want to recap those for us or any others that have come up during that time. And just so you know, we are at 10:57 and we're comfortable going over the time a little bit, but want to be conscious of your schedule as well.
So I'll consolidate the first two questions we sent. So should we not be selected, how do you anticipate managing the connection through the outlet center and any modifications through the outlet center to widen or provide fire access along 257th Way?
So I can try to take that on. So first of all, fire access we've already looked at that with the fire provider, which is Gresham Fire, and it is viable to go through 257 Way. Not very high level, that the right of way exists for that to happen. I mean, to your first question, I think we're kind of going around that. Our goal is to, as the city, is to select a team that has a compelling vision, understands what it means to live in Troutdale, and the city feels like they can be a good partner. I think we've sort of touched a little bit on some certain things about opportunities that might exist, conversations that might exist for bifurcating the shopping center. But it's early, it's premature. I mean, we don't know where all that's going. I think it's important to us. We understand, regardless of who's selected, that there's going to need to be a conversation with Time Equities. It's just so. I'm not sure I'm fully answering your question because I'm not sure I fully can here in the middle of the interview process, given that we still have to interview another team and convene and kind of get our thoughts together. So, but I hope that's kind of helpful, especially on the fire side.
Sure, yep, that's helpful. About the park and ride, is that still on the table? What's the current thinking from the city on the parking garage?
So, so it is something, that is talked about. I think I can't remember, is that in the town center plan?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Transportation.
I'm a newbie, so thank you. But I would say that that would be something that would be something that's still on the radar. I'll say that we are working with ODOT, and they're looking at feasibility studies for park and rides throughout the Columbia Gorge, and this includes this property. So it's still live, if you will, but needs a little bit more massaging. Okay. Yeah.
And then, I guess related, I suppose a pedestrian bridge could exist absent the parking garage, it would be much easier to do if there were structure to connect to at the same grade. In any event, is that still on your radar?
It is. It's in the town center plan, it's in the capital improvement plan. And I'll just push back a little bit, where again, we're in that urban design hat. I think there's many ways that can be done. But there's a couple of pedestrian bridges that are been constructed recently or that are in the works that could be super interesting. But to answer your question, the answer is yes. That one is challenging. You've talked about it because our friends at the railroad are involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
But yes, it is in the town center plan and in the capital improvement plan.
It could be beautiful in its own right.
Yeah.
They're just saying you
yeah.
don't need a parking garage to
Yeah.
land to receive it.
That's what.
Totally, yes, it is possible.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and is that something you would want us involved in, or does that just kind of run, because we're, orienting the streets towards it, where we believe it to be.
I think the answer would be TBD, but yes. We'd surely want, if we're connecting the grid, then we'd surely want your guys' input on where to connect the grid to. I think the mayor and Marley and other folks who know the city better than me have some ideas about where that connection would be best. So, it's a two-part question, right? It's where does this element meet the city, the existing downtown, and where does it land in the Confluence side, and how does it inform both, right? So, but to answer your question, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, to be clear, we really like the bridge.
Yeah.
So,
It's actually harder to figure out where it lands in downtown.
I tend to agree with you.
That's the hard part.
Right.
Right.
So,
Many
yes.
opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any other questions for us that came
I
up during the course of the interview?
I don't, Richard or Ami, do you have any other questions?
No, we thank you for your time and considering us.
I echo that. Thank you very much for everything you've afforded us today and so far in this process.
Absolutely, and thank you for participating even across the country like this. We value your time and know that you're very. Oh,
I'm sorry,
Abe,
I've got
sorry.
one more, like afterthought, sorry, Avi, I'll definitely stay on, because you may be the one who answers. So I'm just curious, if you're putting a pedestrian access way through the mall, would you be putting that through something that already has a roof over it to reduce the infrastructure cost, or I just want to understand it.
It would be studied, but the short answer is yes, so that the structure could be the same. The back of the napkin thought, subject to a lot of things, including lender approval, is that you would keep the infrastructure and do cutouts and put in some I-beams, and the structure wouldn't have to change or shift or meaningfully move. I don't know if that answers your question, but we don't have a great answer for you today because we haven't been selected. We haven't collectively sat down and tried to address an intervention that meets your needs and ours, but it's a conversation we would be willing to have should you desire to work with Paul's team and us.
Okay, yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I was just curious how you.
Sure.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that, because that was actually something that I was thinking of during when you guys were discussing it, and had forgotten to bring that back up. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today, and for your interest in developing this site in Troutdale. We greatly appreciate your enthusiasm and your well thought out designs, your time today. And next steps, we do have to go back as a team and review these, and the Town Center Advisory Board will be providing a ranking and recommendation to the Urban Renewal Agency, who then will be deciding who to move forward with for an exclusive negotiating agreement. So hopefully that will all come together within the next month, and we'll be able to be in touch with where things are at.
So I have One closing
Sure.
statement, and it's really going to come from the guy that would have been sitting right here, but he's in Montana, recruiting new project engineers to come to work for Bremick. Trying to pull them out of Montana and get them to stay here in Oregon, which can be a challenge. But
Yeah.
Mike and I started the company, Bremick, 18 years ago. I can see the building right there on that sign that Mike owns. And we've been involved in these meetings for 15 plus years. And we too have wanted this for so long, probably not as much as you guys, but we've wanted this for a long time. And when this master plan finally came together, we were very selective in who we sought out. We wanted to be part of a team, and we know Wood Partners, we know Capstone, we built for Capstone. My friends work at Wood. This was the team that we chose because this needs to be built. And so we wanted to partner with who do we think has the most opportunity or the highest odds of this thing being built. Forget talking about it, let's build it. And so that's why we're sitting here. And that would have come from this guy had he been sitting here.
And likewise, we thought who would be best to build it. So that's why we're here.
Thank you to the guy who.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I've got some leave behinds for you all, just to give, if who would want them, I'm not sure, but just shows an example of the graphics and kinds of things when the community outreach happens, and it's so important. We have a lot of experience in community outreach, and this is just an example of a package for the Washoe Public Library. This gives you some idea of like the quality of images and how things can go and how useful they can be to help get support. So,
Thank you.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Usually it would sit for that long.